Oh boy, do we have something to talk about today. I'm never this excited about plugins, but Eventide just changed the game when it comes to how we think about using an equalizer, or even what an equalizer is anymore. They just released a new type of EQ that literally separates the tonal frequencies from the transient information. Yeah, think about that for a second. They call it split EQ. And I can think of like a million different ways I would want to use something like that, especially in the context of mastering, where you want to add a bunch of snap to a snare drum or something, but you don't want to make the guitar sound really harsh. Or you could get rid of some boxiness from a bass guitar without affecting the punch of the snare. This is game changing. And until people figure out how to use this thing, it's going to be like the wild, wild west out here in mixing and mastering land. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know right now, but I can tell you that after playing with this EQ for a little bit, it's definitely something super unique that hasn't ever existed in this capacity before. And I'll even go as far as saying that I think this might be a tool that's going to unlock some totally new sounds and textures that we've never heard before. Yeah, I know that's a bold statement, but Eventide has the intellectual property to prove it. And until that patent expires September 22nd, 2037, there's not going to be any other plugins that do what this thing does in the same way. They mentioned there's other things you can do with this transient and tonal separation technology they developed, specifically for reverbs, delays, and things like tremolo. They also talk about using this technology to process other audio streams besides stuff on a computer, like microphones, guitars, synthesizers, keyboards, so on. So we might see this technology being integrated into some hardware down the road, but who knows? I don't know. I'm just speculating. So in this video today, I'm going to walk you through all the different features of Eventide's SplitEQ, and trust me, there is a lot of features in this plugin. And I'm going to do my best to try to explain what each of the different parameters does, and then I'm going to go ahead and showcase it on a bunch of different instruments, and then also on a master bus. So stick with me to the end because this thing is pretty cool. Hey there, friend. It's Bobby Balo, the mixing and mastering engineer at Raytown Productions, and I help you make better sounding music without needing to buy expensive gear or unnecessary plugins. However, this plugin might be necessary. Anyways, if you're new here, thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Be sure to hit that subscribe button because I drop new videos every single week to help you level up the quality of your music. And maybe you don't have the money to spend on a plugin like this today, so I want to let you know that I've prepared a special gift for you. If you check out in the description of this video, I have a link to download my favorite free mixing and mastering plugins guide. This thing is awesome. It has tons of different plugins covering all the categories. So I'm talking compressors, reverbs, limiters, clippers, delays, amp sims. There's even drum samples on this thing. And some of these plugins are ones that I think sound better than my paid plugins. These are plugins I use almost every single time I'm mixing or mastering music, so I know you're going to find them extremely helpful. So if that sounds interesting to you, go and check that out. There's a link to that in the description. All right, so the song we're listening to today is by a band called Dear Spring, and this song is called Gold Walls. This band is dropping some new music pretty soon, so if you like what you hear in this video, definitely go and check out their social media pages and support them. Now, I know there's a lot going on with this plugin, so I'm going to try my best to explain it. Here is the interface. You can see it's nice and clean. We have presets along the top here. Eventide did an awesome job because they have so many cool presets, depending on if you need to repair, rebalance, enhance, widen, or you just modify some of the default presets that they have. They have an A/B feature, which is pretty much standard in all plugins nowadays. It's really nice if you're trying to determine between two different settings. This right side gives us access to some faders that allows us to adjust the overall balance between any of the tonal or transient information, okay? And if you ever want to return something back to its default state, you hold Alt, and then you can click on it, and it goes back to where it is. Then below that, we have pan. So if you want to pan the transient information to the right or left side, you can do that here. Same with the tonal information. I don't use this as a creative tool, so I just leave that centered. The EQ scale thing is really nice because let's say you dialed in a good setting, but then you realize you overdid it. And instead of having to go and adjust each of the bands, you can just come in here and pull this back. Then you have bypass, you have global and EQ. EQ just bypasses the EQ section, which we'll talk about in a second. It leaves the transient and tonal balance active. So if you just want to enhance a little bit of all the transient information, you can go bump this up a dB or something and then bypass the EQ, and you still keep that little bit of transient excitement that you've added. If you want to bypass the whole thing and not worry about anything, that's what the global bypass is for. They have a global analyzer down here, so if you want to see the frequencies that you're working with, you can turn it on. It's on by default. You can also change how the analyzer reacts to the music. The only thing that's important to talk about is the resolution here. So if you are concerned about what the band information is telling you, it's best to go with best for frequency. There will be more of a delay in what you hear and what you see on the analyzer, but this is going to be really, really helpful. If you're trying to EQ the kick drum or something, I would come in here and change it to best for frequency. You can also check out the analyzer pre and post EQ. I just leave it as post, don't really care. So this is just all a matter of preference down here. You don't really need to spend any time messing with that. Down here is where all the magic happens. So this is the EQ section. So we have 6 different bands of EQ. The ones on the very end outside of those EQ bands are basically high and low pass filter. It's nice to have those there just in case we want to mess with that. Each of these bands allow you to adjust the filter type and the slope. So if you don't want to use a shelf, for example, you can come in here and use a peak filter or a notch, or you can do a tilt shelf or a bandpass. Any of those options are available here. And then the slope also gives you a whole bunch of options. Personally, for me, I would avoid these really, really sharp slopes just because they tend to mess with the phase of the material. And I'm not exactly sure if this is working in a linear phase mode or not. So when you want to use the EQ, you can just grab one of these nodes and then just move it around and adjust the EQ. And just like over here where you hold Alt, you can reset that band immediately and it goes right back to 0. So that's nice for a quick workflow. What you might notice is that we have 2 little handles that pop up when you mouse over these nodes. You have this blue handle and the green handle. So the green one is the transient, and you can just look over here if you ever forget. So green is transient, blue is tonal. This EQ works in a very different way than any other normal traditional EQ. You're going to be able to control the EQ shape of anything that's transient, like any snaps of a snare drum, or like the really beginning sharp sibilant sounds of a vocal. And the tonal is just basically everything that's not the transient. So the more predictable sound of the instrument in its own right, okay? This is a super interesting way of approaching EQ. And just to give you an idea of what this can do, I'm just going to play some music for you. And I'm going to do this on a drum bus. So it's a little bit easier to hear the transient versus the tonal information. Now, if we just want to monitor what the bands sound like, we can go over this little headphone icon, and then 2 little windows pop up. We have the green, which lets us monitor the transient information, and then the blue, again, is the tonal. Okay, so I'm just going to increase this tonal region, and then we're going to monitor the tonal part. Okay, so that kind of sounds like a normal EQ, right? But if you listen closely, there's really not a lot of snap, right, anymore with the snare or the kick drum. I mean, it's kind of there, but it's not as exciting as it would be if we had a regular EQ on that. Let's now try the transient band and see what that sounds like when we monitor that. So again, headphone icon, we're going to listen to the green band, which is now the transient information. How crazy is that, right? It's almost like the drums don't exist anymore. It's just the snare and the kick drum. That blows my mind. Like, how cool is it that we can come in and just adjust the punch of that initial transient? We don't have to worry about making like the kick drum tone boomy anymore. This is amazing. Again, let's just listen to the tonal information again. So like you can hear, like we have this long ring on the snare, right? If you hold shift, you can sharpen the Q. You can also do that just by coming here and adjusting the Q down here. So let's try to target that ringing snare using the tonal band. And then we're going to see if we can get rid of the ring without taking away the punch. Okay, so like right here. So let's get rid of that. So there you go. We've pretty much completely eliminated that ring, but at the same time, we're not affecting the transient. In fact, we can enhance the snare in that region now without adding more of that ring back. Check this out. So let's bypass this. Let's just listen to the entire band collectively together. You can do that by just clicking this gray icon. So what you're hearing is literally us enhancing the punch and removing the ring without affecting anything. How cool is that, man? So I'm going to play the drums again, and then we're going to bypass it so you can hear what it's taking out. It's such a cool tool, right? We can literally go in and just take out these little micro problems and not affect the tone of the drums at all. So something else we can do is we can maybe target the punch of the snare drum without having it sound boxy, right? So let me just show you what would happen if we use like a regular EQ. So if I wanted to go in and adjust the punch of the snare so that it's represented on a small speaker, we're going to be EQing somewhere around like 300 or 400. If I try to boost that frequency with a regular EQ, listen to what happens. Right, we're just adding in all of this ringing, and there's nothing we can do about it, right? All right, so let's try to do that using SplitEQ now. I mean, we're boosting, what is this, 9 dB? 9 dB. Do you hear that snare ringing? Like, we have so much more punch now, and it doesn't ruin the tonality of the snare. Let me go back to this just to show you one more time. Listen to how terrible the snare is, right? I mean, what more do I need to say, right? Like, how incredibly powerful is this tool? Now, previously, I was using FabFilter Pro Q3 to do something similar to that, where I would make a cut on like a drum bus or something, and then I would set the dynamic band up into a positive direction so that it would dynamically react to the transients and then go back up to 0 and not attenuate any of the sound. But the way SplitEQ works is fundamentally different from that. SplitEQ doesn't decide if something is a transient because of its level. It decides it, according to its patent, by the amplitude and the frequency trajectory of the incoming signal, which is an absolutely brilliant way of looking at this because it's going to work for anything regardless of the level. If you want to see how they differentiate low-frequency sinusoidal information from transients by calculating the curvature of the trajectory of the amplitude and all this crazy stuff, I'm going to put a link to the patent in the description. So feel free to go check it out, nerd out, and see how this thing works. But I'm just warning you, I'm a scientist by training, and I had a hard time getting through this patent, but I'm by no means a digital signal processing engineer. So we also have a few more options at the very bottom here. You have this EQ and pan buttons, and we can change between left and right panning, so you can take the transient information and pan it to the left, or the tonal information pan it to the right. And why would you ever want to do something like this? Well, there are some instances where maybe you want to take a mono source and make it sound a little bit more 3D. So let's say you have like an acoustic guitar or something. You could pan the body of the acoustic maybe slightly to the left, and then the strumming or the attack or the transient information slightly to the right. And that'll give it a little bit more perceived width to the track. Something else you can do is if you click on this button right here, this will enable mid and side mode. So now you can make, perhaps if you want to do the transient information and make that mid in the middle channel, or you can make the transient information just be on the sides, no longer in the middle channel. And so this is more of a, what I would call like a artistic or a creative option. I can't really think of a way to use this on a mix, except maybe if you wanted to add a little bit of width or excitement on like when a chorus hits, maybe you can automate that in or something. Something I wish this plugin had, which it doesn't, is an ability to maybe do the transient and tonal information on just the middle channel or just the side channel. That would make this an incredibly powerful mastering tool. And so Eventide, if you're listening, do that. Figure out a way to implement mid-side EQ with this plugin. All right, and the last thing I want to mention, and this is probably the most important thing, so I should have said this sooner, but this bar at the very bottom where it says split, this is how we tune the detection circuit for this plugin. So this is how we're going to fine-tune what is in fact a transient and what is in fact the tonal information. Now, the default settings are pretty good right out of the gate, but we definitely need to adjust these parameters to make it as transparent as possible and to maximize the transient information. So when we adjust the transient separation here, this basically lets us dial in the amount of isolation of those transients from the tonal sounds. Basically, we're just telling the algorithm, hey, for these sounds, we want you to call those transients, and for these, we want you to call those tonal sounds. So what do you need to know about down here? Probably the biggest thing is there's this source button. This is basically a bunch of presets that Eventide has made that alter the way the algorithm works under the hood so that you're going to get the best response out of this EQ for the particular application you're looking for. Definitely change this source button to match what kind of track it's on. It really does help. So in this case, it's on a drum bus, so we're going to do full drum set. That's easy. The next part is transient separation. So we can basically just adjust this from 0 to 100. And the best way to hear what all these different parameters are doing down here is to click this little headphone icon. This is going to preview just the decomposed transient and tonal portions of the audio. So the higher the value here is going to make the decision between what's transient and what's tonal very defined. And the lower the value, you're basically going to be introducing a lot more crosstalk between the transient and the tonal information, if that makes any sense. And if you dive into the patent, this essentially is adjusting the decision point of the algorithm where the audio splits both time and frequency into the separate transient and tonal components. And just a fun fact, this parameter used to be called focus. So I'm glad Eventide changed it to transient separation because it's a lot easier to understand what exactly is going on with that parameter. So let's start with the transient separation, see what that sounds like. And that's basically no longer identifying transients at 0%. And it sounds like it's doing a really good job of isolating the transients at 100%. Let's check out what decay does. You can think of decay as like a release knob. So at the lower decay settings, you're going to get just the tiny little punchy, really short, sharp transient information. The longer decays are going to open it up and make it a little bit more natural sounding. But for like metal and rock, I can imagine you're going to want a really short decay just to really enhance that initial attack on a kick drum or a snare or something like that. So that sounds good to me. So finally, we have this smooth feature, and this basically adjusts the amount of time in between the algorithm deciding if something that is tonal can change into being a transient, or if something that's transient is now no longer transient and should be a tonal sound. So what that means for you is that the shorter the smoothing, the more aggressive and pokey the sound is going to become. But also, you're going to get a lot of weird, probably unwanted transient chirping noises. So the longer the smooth setting, the longer it takes the algorithm to decide if something is a transient or not. And so that has the effect of the transient feeling softened. You're probably going to want to find the sweet spot between not having a ton of chirpy artifacts, but still having a lot of punch to your transient. So let's dial that in. I mean, you can hear how weird those artifacts sound, right? It's pretty obvious. So for me, right around here sounds good. All right, so how does it sound on bass? So here's the bass tone without SplitEQ. By the way, I love the bass tone in this track. I mean, in my opinion, this is mixed incredibly well because I didn't. But if we wanted to add more attack to this, what always happens for me when I'm doing this to bass is the bass gets way, way, way harsh. There's really no good way to really enhance the pick attack without just boosting up all these super harsh frequencies in the bass guitar. This is why SplitEQ is awesome, is because maybe we can just boost the pick attack without messing with the harsh frequencies. Or maybe we can cut the harsh frequencies without affecting the pick attack, right? And I think on a guitar DI track, this could be huge for making a guitar sound really, really heavy, especially for something like metal. Before you feed it into an amp sim, you can kind of juice your DI tracks and make the attack so aggressive, but not make the tone of the guitar harsh. It's a game changer. So let's try to make this thing sound cool. Again, to approach it, let's start down here and dial in our source with a bass guitar, and let's pull in that transient separation and find a sweet spot for that. And again, make sure that we're listening in solo so we can just hear what the transient total information is. We're focusing on the pick attack. And for me, I really think it sounds best almost totally cranked up here. Let's dial in the decay. We don't want the decay to be too long because, again, this is just that initial attack on the bass. Oh, that's crazy. I mean, that almost sounds just like it's just the pick attack, right? All right, let's adjust the smooth. That's so crazy. That is literally just the pick scraping. All right, so I think we're in a good spot right now. So now if we take the transient EQ band, the green one, boost it, we're going to be just enhancing that pick attack. Let's do it. And I'm going to solo it so we can hear it. Find a good spot. That sounds pretty good to me. Let's check it out in the mix. Oh, crazy. You can literally just hear it's just the pick scraping right here. So let's not be that aggressive. So yeah, you can really hear it really bites into it. Now, it's too much for this track, but I just want to show you how powerful this could be. So you could either boost the pick attack that way, or we could selectively cut the tonal harshness out of the bass guitar and still leave an aggressive pick attack to help define the aggression of the bass guitar. So let's just pull out some of the harshness out of the tonal characteristic. So like right there, it's pretty bad, right? And if you want to just quickly preview what's going on in this band, you can hold Control, Alt, and then click on this, and it will just preview it for you. If you're on a Mac, I think it's Command Alt. Okay, so this is clearly the problem area. Pull that out. Notice when I pulled it out, we still have all the pick attack there. It's crazy. See, it's harsh. Super smooth with that nice clanky attack. Oh my God, this plugin's awesome. I'm assuming it's going to be the exact same situation on the guitars. Let's just throw this on guitars and see. Again, I can see this be an incredible tool for pulling out harshness without losing the aggressive pick attack. So again, I'm going to grab the, I'll start with the tonal. Yeah, that can go away. No one's missing that. And then we can enhance the pick attack by taking this transient node and bringing this up. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to do the split down here and do the right source, which is a guitar, and then go through this process because I got too excited. You guys got me all excited, and I rushed this whole thing and messed it up. Now we got to go through and actually set up the transients right so that it's going to sound awesome. Let's dial this in now. Now that we cut this harshness out, let's try to bring back some of the pick attack on these guitars. And then I just want to solo this band again, try to really lock in that frequency, that whistling, really harsh stuff. Well, I hope the guys in Deer Spring don't see this video because their mix sounds a lot better. Thank you, SplitEQ. It just sounds so much more live and in your face when you have this kind of stuff. Man, that's so crazy. All right, what about vocals? Let's do it. So the things I'm thinking of right away, number one, we should be able to destroy any sibilance. Okay, this is probably going to be an amazing de-esser. So if we just go and use the transient band and pull down wherever it's the most harsh, we could get rid of all the transients and then brighten up the vocal so that we have the air of the vocal, but it doesn't ever get harsh. All right, so the way I would approach this is, first of all, don't forget, let's set up the bottom correctly, get it to vocal. Let's let's establish what is a transient and what is the tonal.
Of nostalgia, we'll pass it into madness. Down we go. No, X is the smallest push in the right direction. I'll be waiting down at the bottom for you.
Sounds pretty good to me. Let's not overthink it, okay? Now, let's increase the air on just the tonal portion of this, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's so cool because normally when you boost like 8 dB in this region with a shelf, all those S sounds get super sibilant. This sounds really smooth. This is like the smoothest sounding EQ I've ever heard on a vocal. Oh my God. This is gonna live on my vocal chain now.
Oh, then you've been at it for quite a minute now, but I've watched.
You hear that? There's no sibilance. Let's just pull up. Man, I gotta move all this crap now. I'm just gonna do the same move with an EQ. Let's compare it. I think this is gonna blow your mind. Okay, we got a shelf. Here's the same move using a stock EQ.
Decline, a hint of nostalgia, we'll pass it into madness.
Oh, you hear it like pass it, like the S is so bright. Listen.
Decline, a hint of nostalgia, we'll pass it into madness.
So that's okay. If we use SplitEQ and have it just affect the tonal region, so none of the bright S sounds, let's see what it sounds like.
This inevitable decline, a hint of nostalgia, we'll pass it into madness.
Oh my God, it's so much cleaner. And let's pull the transient down a little bit here, and that should pull out any of that remaining sibilance.
Madness, down we go. No, it's mad it now, but I'm
How cool is that, man? Let me bypass it so you can see how much this thing is doing.
cold. While you've been painting the walls gold, and you've been at it for quite a minute now, but I'm watching you circulate.
Dude, this is cool. If I haven't convinced you to get this thing yet, maybe this final thing will do it. Let's put it on the master bus. Because I do a lot of mastering work, and I know right off the bat, there's certain things that are like impossible for me to target with an EQ. Number one, I want to see if we can add some punch to the snare without making like the low mids, like 200 hertz range, muddy sounding, where all the guitars and bass are. And then I also want to see if I can add snap to the snare and kick drum in the 4 and 5K range, where the electric guitars are always notoriously harsh. We'll also see if we can pull some of the harshness out of the guitars without affecting the snap on the kick or snare. And if we can do that, man, it'll be over. It's over. Let's start with the punch on the snare. Wow, this worked so well to do that. I can't believe it. So let's try to bring out the snap on the snare and kick without making the guitars harsh. Oh my gosh. That is so amazing. All right, let's go to a part where the guitars are really rocking out and see if we can pull out the tonal part where it might be too harsh sounding. All right, so let's hone in on that harsh region. It's so crazy. It pulls all the harshness out of the guitars, but I don't hear it taking away the clarity of the vocal or the snap and the kick and snare. Man, this is cool. This is going to change the game. People are going to do some crazy stuff. It's going to sound weird at first, but my God, this is a powerful tool. So what did you think about Eventide SplitEQ from this demo? Do you think it's all snake oil, or is this something you could find yourself using? And if so, what would you use it on? Let me know in the comments. Personally, I think this is going to be an incredible mastering tool because you can access certain things that you weren't ever able to adjust before and adjust it in a super transparent way. But I can also see this tool being way overused in a lot of contexts, so we'll see what the future holds. And don't forget to grab your copy of my favorite free mixing and mastering plugins. I only put the best ones in that guide, and I know you're gonna find it super valuable, so go and grab that before you leave today, especially if you're looking for some new tools to inspire some creativity. I also have links to Eventide SplitEQ in the description, so if you want to check this plugin out with a little bit more detail, definitely go and do that. And with that, I want to thank you again for your time and attention today, and I hope to see you in another video.